Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Doctors of Running podcast, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and science of running and the stuff that we put on our feet. Today, I am solo hosting. My name is Nathan Brown, but I'm not alone, thankfully, because you would have to put up with me the whole time. I have the privilege of having Doug Adams with me. Doug has been on this podcast before. He's a physical therapist. He has trained for Tin Man Elite, which are the elite athletes for Adidas. He has tons of experience in gait analysis. He's an expert in that area, and he's just a phenomenal physical therapist. He went to the University of Delaware, which is also my alma mater. So I'm repping, if you're on YouTube, you can see I'm repping the Fighting Blue Hens today. Ironically, the Packers on day of recording played the Bengals, who just had Joe Flacco traded to them, and Joe Flacco is an alum of UD. So big day for the Fighting Blue Hens, except thankfully they lost to the Packers. My youngest son was at the game with his grandpa, and that is not why you come and listen to this podcast. So Doug, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you as always, Nathan. Great to be here. And, anytime we're calling out some Blue Hen stuff, Delaware, Small Wonder, First State, we got to rep, got to speak loud and proud about it.
Anytime we can elevate UD is a good thing. They don't get a lot of attention.
No.
Doug, thank you for joining us. Could you just, for the people who may not have heard you speak on this podcast before, could you just share a little bit more about yourself as a physical therapist and a runner and kind of what you do now?
Absolutely. Yeah. I am a giant running nerd is basically what I've done. I was the typical, I was a triathlete in high school and got injured there and got really interested and did my senior project on fitness testing and gait and all these different things, and got kind of exposed to running form analysis then. Got lucky in PT school and got to train with some of the top researchers in the world that were looking at running, with Irene Davis, Rich Willie, my mentor, Lynn Snyder-Mackler. Just got a lot of chance to get there. And I just spent my career really working with runners, developed some education courses, and found a lot of good reception to that. Classifying how runners are moving and what their form looks like. And then we built some 3D technology to support that education later. Worked with the Department of Defense, then started working with professional runners. And now I just get to teach about running and work with runners and just spend and now coaching third and fourth grade cross country for St. Mary Magdalene Bulldogs. Let's go, boys. Got my little squad there. So
it's got to be the same as those elite athletes, right? Exact same tactics.
Yes, exactly. They just love doing, 1,000-meter repeats on the track. They're so locked into that, but no, that's actually a lot of fun too. I enjoy that a lot.
Good. Well, we're glad that you are willing to take up time and just come talk with us, because when we bring you on, what we'd love to do is just hear another physical therapist perspective on usually a specific kind of common injury that runners will see. And so that's what we're going to do again today. We're going to be talking specifically about the term shin splints. And what we want to do is address some of the biggest and most common questions that come up on shin splints on social media, what we've seen with Doctors of Running, what you see with all of your platforms and education through Run DNA, and just what is out in the stratosphere. So we're going to address some of these top questions. We're going to get through as many as we can. And hopefully through that, you can learn a little bit about what this condition is and what that means for you and how you can think about it well, and how that can maybe change how and what you do as you try to continue to run healthy. So I think the first thing that we should probably do is talk about what this term is. So when you hear the word shin splints, what comes to mind, and what are we going to be really talking about today?
Yeah, there's a technical term that makes it sound a lot more scientific. We call it medial tibial stress syndrome. It also makes it sound like something we should raise money for. It's like a charity type thing, but it's actually not that scary. And this is pain that we're going to differentiate a little pain on the inside of your shin, the big toe side of the shin versus on the outside, the pinky toe side of the shin. Because shin splints can be a catch-all phrase, and we should clarify really which side we're talking about. So when we say shin splints, especially today, just for ease, we'll be talking more about that medial tibial stress syndrome.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I think as we go through some of these questions, we will continually tease out what that meaning is, because there are implications for different types of things that cause pain in that area. So that'll be a fun part of the conversation as well. I also like to think of shin splints as this big umbrella term. It's kind of like saying that someone has knee pain. And
Yeah.
that's not like a specific diagnosis of something in particular. It doesn't really tell you what to do. Shin splints is the same. And so when, as a therapist, and you would probably agree with me here, if a runner comes in, they're like, yeah, I've got some shin splints going on. Me, I'm like, all right, we got to figure out what's actually going on then, because shin splints just means you have pain in your shin somewhere. And
Right.
that's what we're going to talk about more today. So I think one of the big questions that people who are runners have, because we never want to stop running, if you're experiencing shin splints, well, that first big question is, can I keep running with shin splints?
Yeah, that's a huge one, right? Because that is the number one question probably for every injury that
Totally.
runners are going to come to you and say, like, can I keep running or should I keep running? Maybe is the question they should be asking there. I think it's really important to use some criteria for this and start to ask yourself a couple questions. When somebody asks me that question, I'm not just going to give a blanket answer. Be like, absolutely, you can or you can't run when you're having the shin pain. So there's a couple clarification questions I think really help you understand what stage it's in. In the early stage of medial tibial stress syndrome, shin splints, you're going to see that this is something that it might not start when you first start running, and then the pain comes on, and then the pain goes away, and the intensity isn't that high. Maybe it gets to 2 or 3 out of 10. If that's the case, you can keep running. And we just need to ask yourself a couple follow-up questions is how long does it hurt after the run? So now you're done the run. Did you get pain later? Did you have increased pain with walking around the house? And did that stick around for a while? So Delaware has these like soreness rules that we've used more for ACL, but it's really helpful in this scenario too, that if you have pain for a day after you're running, it's probably like good, but don't progress it. If you're having pain for 48 hours after it, that was too much and you need to back it off. And then if the pain comes on a day or two later and it's really intense, that was definitely too much and you need to back off. So that early stage is one that you can really keep running with, but we're probably going to hit on this later with some of the other questions too. One of the biggest reasons that people get shin splints is what we call training load errors. This means that you're running too fast, too far, too frequent. And when we see that people are doing this, this is when they get shin splints. Because in my mind, this is almost nearly 100% preventable. These shin
Right.
splints are something that you really could get ahead of, and you should be able to trace it back to something that happened or something you did or something that you have that is contributing to it. And therefore, if you manage it well and maybe you're backing off the training volume a little bit, but you can keep running, then I think that's important. When we get to later stages, that's when you really have to say, when should I shut down? How long should I shut down for? And what else can I be doing when I'm shut down?
I think those are really important distinctions too. Over time, is like at what point, and the soreness rules is a really nice resource. And if you're like, okay, tell me more about these soreness rules, Delaware puts those out for people to look at. So
Mm-hmm.
you can just type into Google UDPT protocols. And then if you go under, there's little tabs under the first hit that you'll get on Google, you can find those soreness rules and kind of take a peek at what they're talking about. And I don't know if this will be helpful for people, but as you were talking, I drew some really fancy graphs. And one of the things you talked about, Doug, was kind of pattern of pain during a run. And if you're having this pattern of pain where you start with no pain, it just continuously worsens throughout a run. That's very different than it kind of comes on at first, but then dissipates by the end. In my mind, those patterns really matter, where it tells you tissue irritability. Maybe it's just like, oh, this is load. And then it's like, oh, this is not a dangerous load, in your body kind of customizes to it and it takes away the signal. But
Yeah.
as you said, if you're worsening throughout the run, that's a very more advanced versus something that kind of comes at the beginning but then goes away. So those patterns are just as important as the severity of the pain itself.
Absolutely, and that's part of the soreness rules. Back in the day when I was a resident, one of my thing, I don't think I was the first one to publish them at UD, but one of the early ones for the JOSPT paper in 2012, we published them in there, and it's a good resource. And part of it is if the soreness goes away with warm up, then you can continue. If the soreness doesn't go away during warm up, stop.
Yep. That's a huge deal. So when you talk about maybe you can keep running at these earlier stages, maybe not so much at the end. Usually when people are asking, can I keep running with shin splints? It's because they got a race coming up. So, let's say you've got a marathon runner, half marathon runner, they're in a training block. They've got maybe a month left, maybe 2 months left. What do you think is the success rate to getting to race day healthy when you're having these symptoms?
The success rate. It's a great clarification too, because a lot of times you're like, well, which runs, if I'm going to modify, let's say that you're not in that early stage and you're in a medium to a high stage of having this, like which run should you do? Should you do your long run? Should you do your track workout and your race pace kind of workout? Or should you just do easy miles and try to maintain fitness? I think, like, first of all, you don't have to do a whole lot to maintain fitness. If you're doing half of what you're doing, you're going to maintain fitness. Now, that doesn't mean you're building fitness. So if you're planning to get more and more fit, you're not building it, but you're not losing it. So don't, hit the 5-alarm button here. Like, you're going to be okay if you do a little bit. I think a little bit of it depends again on when you feel the symptom, right? And some of it is like, where is it coming from? Because the whole thing with it is, we said it's highly preventable, and we didn't say it yet, but I'll say it now. Shin splints are something that's highly recurrent in people as well. And the reason I think that the high recurrence is because people aren't addressing the root cause. They're not addressing, like, why did they develop these shin splints in the first place? And if they do, they'll understand it better. So a little tangent to your question, but I think if you're saying the success rate of it here, I think people can successfully get to the race with just modifying their training load and having a plan, whether that's take a short break and just do nothing for a little bit and cross train, or is it I'm only going to hit my key workouts that I'm doing. They're pretty successful at getting through the race, but I think they're not always happy with the results of the race if they're still having the pain.
Right. Yeah, there's that little left on the table probably that would have been attainable with some training, but you can get there usually. It's just not as smooth of a path.
Yeah. It's not always a disqualifying run, kind of to continue on the should I run or not.
Right.
It is something that is not a stop, do not pass go, you must rest type workout or type injury. But it is something that if it's managed well early, it can really be a non-factor. If it's not managed well early, it can become a big issue that you really don't want to have to deal with.
Yeah. I think two of the things you've mentioned that I think are going through, one of them is one of the questions that is hit the top questions that people ask about this. It's that question about, will this keep coming back? And then you also referenced this concept of it's highly preventable, which isn't directly addressed in one of these questions. So if you're okay, I'd love to go there and get your perspective, because I think that's what people really want, is they don't want to have to rehab. They want to stay healthy. So when you think about what it looks like to prevent, shin splints or medial tibial stress syndrome, how do we do that? What's your concept and perspective there? Because this is like one of those most common ones that people are like, once I start running again, my shins start hurting, I'm done. Like it's a very common thing. So what are your thoughts?
Well, the first thing isn't always possible, but if we're talking about prevention, I would get my DeLorean out and go back in time and prevent sport specialization and have everyone do jumping and cutting sports until they're 16.
Oh my gosh. Yes, please.
That would be probably one of the best preventable things, because what we know about doing jumping and cutting sports is that it increases the size of the bone better than just running alone would do. So if you were the 3-season runner that never did any different sports or cross training, I would highly recommend that you go back in time and teach yourself that you need to do some jumping, play basketball in the winter. I'm not popular in Delaware or things for saying this, but I'm not a big fan of winter track. I think
Mm-hmm.
that they should play other sports and
Yeah.
do basketball is great for cross training, or even swimming just to give them a deloading time. They need to do things other than run to help
Yeah.
prevent it. So, yeah.
I want to add one thing to that. I went to a conference and there was someone presenting on this topic, and really quick, medial tibial stress syndrome, shin splints. This is ultimately dealing with the bone, and what is really common in younger athletes are bone-related injuries. A little bit less common in adults, though it's definitely still very prevalent. But it tends to be more soft tissue stuff. But they found for these kids that for those who are non-sport specializers, or the ones who are sports specializers, and they define that as them who do the sport for 9 months or more out of the year. They don't have this 3-month alteration. That's what the studies did. There's like a 67% like decrease in your injury risk for bone stress
Hmm.
injuries if you are not sport specializing. So I totally am on board with you here, and evidence backs this up. So I love that. Number
Yes.
one, if you're a kid or you've got kids, like, don't sport specialize, because you can actually
Yes.
perform better too if you don't get hurt. You're going to be a lot better anyway.
Yeah. Now,
So,
for the rest of us that are already running
yep.
and maybe haven't had these, or you have and you want to keep them from coming back again, I think there's a couple simple things, and maybe let's pick one or two that people could do just
Yeah.
to like get ahead of it there. So I think calf strength is probably one of the biggest ones that we can do here. This is an injury that shin splints, there's a little bit of debate and a lack of pure understanding of whether this comes from just pure mechanical bone loading versus the pull of the muscle on the bone that they
Mm-hmm.
call the periosteum. And there is a little bit of debate, but either way, from what we know, I believe that having a stronger calf is going to reduce either method of injury. And it might be a
Yeah.
combination of two. In my brain, it makes sense that the periosteum pulls on it and the bone is weakened, and then it gets loaded, and then it doesn't like that. And that's where you start to get the shin pain here. So having a stronger calf muscle or plantar flexor strength is going to really just help you to be able to reduce and absorb some of the forces that are occurring at the tibia, your shin bone. So I think that doing that on a regular basis is extremely helpful because it's also beneficial for performance. It's also beneficial for like so many different other injuries too. So doing calf strengthening is just a no-brainer to keep up with. For those of you on the YouTube channel, bald guy, not much to do in the shower, calf raises, keeps me in the warm water for a little longer. So yeah, just be mindful of doing calf raises if you can.
Do you think that those can be just single leg body weight and that's sufficient for the type of strengthening you're thinking about? Or do you think, oh, you got to add some external load to this? Where are you at on that?
In an ideal world, we would add external load, and I
Okay.
think it's really helpful to get that. But I think there are marginal gains to be made with that versus just doing consistent calf strengthening.
Yeah.
From a neuromuscular standpoint of just keeping the body activating there and focusing on control, one of the things that I teach people when they do calf raises and when they do a lot of foot exercises is about the foot pyramid, basically the foot triangle. So
Mm.
think about there's 3 spots underneath of your foot, right underneath of the big toe, the knuckle joint underneath of your big toe, the knuckle joint by your pinky toe, and then in the center of your heel. And when you're doing calf raises, we want to
Mm.
keep pressure between those first 2 points,
Love that.
and make sure that you're maintaining that so that you have good quality of motion with it too. I actually see a lot of people with Achilles as well, different injury, but I
Yeah.
see a lot of Achilles people doing calf raises incorrectly and potentially contributing to some of these symptoms because they're actually loading the tissues not the way we're really looking for, or using
Hmm.
different muscles to accomplish the activity.
Yeah. So calf strength seems like some low hanging fruit to ward this off.
Yes.
Is there another one that you think is the other kind of low hanging fruit for people?
I would say this one is a little more abstract, but it's really helpful, would be to do barefoot hip strengthening. So
Mm.
doing exercises for proximal stability, so focusing on your hip and core, but doing in weight bearing positions in a barefoot position.
Hmm.
Because we do know that one of the things that contributes to the development of shin splints is that we spend a lot of time, or we go through a lot of motion into pronation. And that eversion pronation that we see oftentimes has contributions from the hip. And I find that it's best to train in barefoot because we're trying to create this connection between our foot and our hip so that we're understanding both, and we're training the foot muscles and the calf muscles to be able to control the foot while we're also doing hip exercises. So
Yeah.
we do like a stork exercise where you stand against the wall, pushing a knee out into that. We call that hip abduction isometrics. Those are really great exercises, and doing that stuff barefoot gives you a good connection and awareness of how to control the foot a little bit better, but also how to have control of the hip so that you're not going into as much of that pronation.
That's great. I am preaching to myself in this, but there was a study that came out last year. So what you're saying like just lines up with this so well. The study basically had 3 different exercise regimens that it gave a bunch of runners to try to prevent injuries. Period. They weren't specific to some sort of injury. And ultimately, I'm not even going to go into the details, but one of the groups of the 3 different regimens did better than the other ones, but it was only the people who were consistent in
Mm-hmm.
that group, meaning they missed over a very long period of time. They only missed 2 over like, it was something like 24 or 36 weeks or something. So over 6 months, they only missed 2 sessions. And
Hmm.
so in my mind, even thinking about calf raises and then these other hip exercises, being consistent is going to be better than being perfect. Because if you have
Oh
to
yeah.
wait for perfection, like you're probably going to miss out on the benefits that you can get with
I
this
don't
kind
know
of
if this
stuff.
is the same study, but I saw one recently that's saying to get the benefits of strength training for runners, you pretty much need to do it for about 7 months. And
Yeah,
that's how
yeah.
long you need to be consistent with
Well,
it. It might be a different study, but
maybe
it
different. Yeah,
was like you have to do it 7 months before you start getting some of the benefits for your bone, before you really start seeing some cross-sectional differences in the muscle. It's important to be really consistent. So the
yeah,
exercise selection, if you're hitting the major muscle groups, that's important, but
right.
which exercises you're doing isn't as important. It's just that you're doing them on a consistent
Yep,
basis.
totally. And I'm going to throw one thing out there with as we talk about consistency, I can hear people that I've worked with in the past saying, okay, but what if I take some time off of strength training because I'm in a heavy block of my training? In my mind, great. Periodization is a thing.
Yes.
We're going to have these waxes and waning of what's important. So if you're like, crap, at my last marathon training, I took 4 weeks off of my heavier strengthening because I was doing so much running. Awesome. That's great. You're not going to like lose everything that you gained from that.
Right. I 100% agree. Like periodization is huge here. And we really should look at that. There is some interesting things too, where I'm seeing a lot of strength training and people that are very vocal in strength training for runners saying that there is benefit from doing isometric
Mm,
exercises in that period because your
cool.
body is used to load, but it doesn't want to have the same tissue damage, but it
It's great.
keeps the activation. So sometimes doing limited repetitions of isometric activities will get your body to still feel fresh and good without putting the stress on it, and keep some of the neuromuscular benefits, which is basically meaning your brain is able to contract the muscles better, which is what we're looking for with running anyway.
If you've listened to this show before, you know that I love geeking out on biomechanics and the science of running, and that's one of the reasons that I took the Certified Endurance Running Coach course from Run DNA. It's a course designed not just for coaches, but honestly anyone that wants to deepen their understanding of the science and evidence behind how to manage things like training load and design training so that you can get to the goals that you want to achieve. It's a great course that blends the evidence-based and science-based teaching with extremely practical tools that you can actually use, again, whether that's for yourself in your own training or if you are someone who is coaching others. It's also helped me understand training so that I can help other people that I'm working with in physical therapy. This is a course that has been taken by over 10,000 people around the globe, and I can vouch that this education can give you a really solid foundation of thinking of the why and how you go about run training for yourself or others. If you want to check it out, you can go to rundna.com and use the code DOR20 to get 20% off the endurance coaching certification. Well, let's move on to another one of the most common questions. And this is one where people are probably experiencing this pain and they're starting to be like, what's actually going on here? Because as we said, this is a bone related thing. So another extremely common question is this shin splints or medial tibial stress syndrome, or is this a stress fracture? So how do you answer that question?
So that's a great one here. And I think we could have said this maybe towards the beginning too, but one of the first ways to assess to see if you even have medial tibial stress syndrome is to start to palpate and start to see if there is an area of about 3 inches or so along between the lower third and middle third of your shin. If you have tenderness along that ridge of the bone right there, that a lot of times is that medial tibial stress syndrome, where it's about a more diffuse area. When we start to see it progress towards stress fracture, we start to see it gets pretty focal. And there's a very high amount of pain in one specific area here. That's where we start to get a little bit more concerned that it's not diffuse. Now it's become fairly focal. Couple other things to look out for too. One of the big things I always ask is, are you having pain at night? Yep. Are you having pain when you're unloaded, when you're sleeping at night, when the bone is starting to do some of its regenerative process here? If you're getting a lot of pain there, that's a warning sign. And then there is a test that I use from a study. It's a fairly recent one. It's the single leg hop test.
Yeah.
And are you familiar with that one?
Mm-hmm.
If you do like 10 hops on single leg, if you can't do that, it's fairly sensitive to say whether you have a bone stress injury. So it can't, what that means is you're not saying that you have a fracture if you can't hop 10 times in a row because of pain. But what you are saying is it's very unlikely that you do have a stress fracture if you can hop 10 times on a single leg without having to stop due to pain. So that's an important one if you're at home and looking to say, hey, should I go for that run? Should I do this? Or am I getting closer to stress fracture? Those are some things that I use clinically to be able to help my patients understand if it's something that we should be getting some more input on or if it's something that we can keep pushing through.
Yeah, that's a good distinction. That focal tenderness is super helpful. And again, so if you're pushing on that shin on the inside ridge and it's a very small, like less than, basically one finger's width, if that's the only tender area, that's a little bit on the more concerning side. If you haven't seen somebody, might be worth like calling up your favorite PT and working with them on it. But if it's this really diffuse thing, probably less likely that you're looking at an actual stress fracture. With the hop test, I just want to ask a clarifying question with how you use it and how people can think about this if they're doing it at home. If there's like some soreness, but they can do the hops through it, that's still considered a negative test and it's less likely that it's a stress fracture. It's just that you try to do 10 and the pain's so bad that you have to stop. interpreting that correctly?
That's how I use it.
Yeah.
Yes, correctly. I forget the study. It's been a little bit since I've read the study around it there.
Yeah.
But what I see is like, hey, like I will stop somebody though if they're doing it in front of me, and I
Yeah.
start to notice maybe they were getting 2 inches off the ground, and now it's like they're barely getting off the ground, and they're kind of cheating it. If they're doing consistent 10 hops in a row without resting, kind of like a pogo hop, if you
Yeah.
can do 10 of those in a row, then you're pretty good. Now, if you can't walk for an hour after that, you got your answer.
Yeah.
Basically, that you need to go figure it out.
Yeah.
I think it's important that you have these kind of clinical based tests that you can just real quickly say, should I go run or shouldn't I? Do your hop test. That'll help you figure it out.
Great. All right, our next most common question is one that's pretty logical in this progression of people experiencing pain. Usually they're like, my shin's hurting. What is it? Is this a stress fracture? And then they're like, why did this happen in the first place? Because if I can figure out what happened, maybe I can fix it. So if I can get to the root of what caused it, I can fix it. So I think the next most common question is, what is the thing that's causing shin splints? And that has all of these, does blank cause shin splints? Like, did my shoes cause my shin splints? Did my form cause my shin splints? Did my training cause my shin splints? Those are all the questions that fit under this umbrella. How do you think about what causes this condition for people?
Yeah, it's that probably is the first. The first question is going to be, "Can I run?" But probably
Yeah.
the first question should
Yeah.
be this one of like, "What caused this in the first place?" Here, that's normally their last question after you've educated them a little bit. But it's a really important one, and I think if we list it kind of in a hierarchy, training is probably one of the most important ones here. I
Yeah.
think this is one that you have to address and really look at right away and review the training program to see where did I spike my intensity? Where did I spike my long runs? I mean, there's lots of good literature. We could go into a whole conversation about acute to chronic workload ratios and 10% rules and all those kind of things and what's good, what's not good. And I think it's important. I will just say that if you can identify and track a spike in your training load, that's really important to address and try to avoid that from happening again, because that
Mm.
is 100% preventable. I'll
Yeah.
never forget when I first started working with a lot of professional runners. I was treating this one professional runner, and he was really hesitant to tell me
Huh.
something. I was like, what's going on? Why don't you want to tell me this? He's like, I'm embarrassed. I have shin splints. He's like, I haven't had shin pain since I was a JV runner in high school. He's like, I feel embarrassed to have it. But like, don't worry. It happens to a lot of people actually there. And it is very much related to training. And we were able to trace
Hmm.
back a spike in that person's training, and we're able to address it. And it can go away pretty quickly once you know how to address it.
Huh.
So that's got to be number one priority
Yeah.
is looking at training. Then I think this is a big part, and one of my favorite is an underlooked thing is actually the running form. I
Mm.
think this has to be looked at. It has to be something that we look at and with a fine tooth comb and try to get to that root cause of what is contributing to this. So this is one of the injuries that does have pretty good evidence to show that there are biomechanical changes. So people's running form is different. I think there could be a little bit better evidence about like, is this a result of the pain that there's
Right.
different, or is this the cause of the pain? But there's enough evidence in my mind to start to see that this is something that we're seeing before people get this injury, that they're going into some of that excessive pronation and they're in that collapsing category. So we've got these 5 categories of runners that we talk about a lot of Run DNA. And in that, collapser is a big one, where basically the knees are coming in, the feet are, coming in, toes are rotating out. That changes the stress on the body because our bones are really good at loading straight up and down, but they don't like any twisting. And one of the things we teach in this course is that when you get that twisting motion, your bones only can absorb 59% of their normal
Wow.
capacity,
Yeah.
which is not enough to run downhill without causing micro trauma to
Mm-hmm.
your bone. So if you think about that, like this is a bony type injury that we're talking about here. We need to address those mechanics, and we need to identify if we are a collapser, if there are those things going on. We can also see high forces related to overstrider, one of the other 5 categories that we talked about. If the forces are high and we're really not absorbing the forces in the appropriate structure, then something else is going to take more of the forces than it should. And that's where we can get some of these shin splints as well. So I think addressing those 2 big categories is
Yeah.
really important from a gait or running form standpoint with runners.
I've got a question for you, and I know that there are mixed opinions on the answer to the question that I'm about to ask you, and so I'm just curious about yours. You talked about those common patterns that we're seeing with the bone loading, and then you said what's not super clear in the evidence is whether it's causing it or if it's a result of. So if you're looking at somebody, we already talked about some of the common prevention things, and we talked about calf strengthening and hip stuff in terms of the doing hip kind of coordination control exercise with bare feet. Is changing running form something that you do for prevention of shin splints as well? Where do you fall on that spectrum of like every collapser? Do you try to change their gait, or are some collapsers fine to be collapsers because their body's adapted to it? Where do you live?
I'm going to take a strong stance on this because I've been getting this question for a long time, and I
Yeah.
think we're doing a disservice to people by not changing the mechanics if we see these mechanics happening.
Hmm.
And that's a strong stance on it. And I know that there are people that will outright disagree with me on this, but I am going to say those people just aren't injured yet. There is a high amount of load that are in stress that our body occurs when we are running. And the person that has bad mechanics, even if they're not injured, they might be one bad night's sleep away from not being able to absorb the forces anymore. They might switch from training for 5Ks to going to a half marathon. And that form that wasn't an issue now is going to become an issue. And I have been very successful in my career of helping people to improve their running gait, because I think here's the caveat to this and why I'm so strong on this.
Yeah.
You don't have to make somebody perfect. We're just going for a 10% improvement in the
Yeah, I
running
like that.
mechanics. It's so I'm strong on the front of it, but I'm a little
Yeah.
bit more moderate in the middle, where it's like we absolutely need to address that, but they absolutely don't have to be perfect. We need
Yeah.
to think about, can we reduce it? Because what the science shows is that tissues like bone, if you reduce the stress by 10%, they can run twice as far before the body breaks down. 10% is so easy to do. It is something that is, when you find the right thing, it makes all the difference in the world.
Hmm.
So that's where you need to do a good job of doing the running form analysis, and you
Yeah.
need to understand what could be contributing to it and what's not. And when you find that right thing, making 10%, no problem at all. So I 100% think that running form needs to be addressed for every single runner. And the worst that's going to happen, I think, is you probably can run a little faster because you're running more efficiently if you do the gait retraining right? Because you can't just say, okay, change your form and go do it. Like
Yeah.
a well-trained, qualified professional is going to know how to get you to change your form appropriately, gradually, so that you know exactly what to do. And you do need guidance on this. We're one of the few sports that thinks like, oh, we don't need coaches. We don't need
We just
pros, but like,
run.
yeah. I mean, how many people make a living as a golf pro or a tennis pro, right? Like,
Yeah.
where's our running pros, right? Our running pros need to be out there too,
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's more important than, I would say, even than swinging a golf club correctly or a tennis
Right.
racket.
Yeah, that's great. And I think something that you said that's interesting is having it guided by a professional. It's going to probably take a while. I kind of have 2 swirling thoughts in my head, so we'll see if I can get them out coherently or not. One of them is when you think about when to do this, Like, is this something that I work with a lot of college runners. Is changing running form something you do during the cross country season, or is it in the off season? Is changing your running form, again, we're talking on a preventative lens. These are non-injured folks. Is this something that you do with a runner during their marathon training block or during an off season? So my first question is kind of like, what do you think is the appropriate time to do this?
The best time would be, going back to periodization, in that base phase, right?
Yeah.
You're in a pre-base or you're in the base phase and you're doing lots of easy stuff, not a lot of intensity. It's a great time to just work on the form. I think everyone should get a running form analysis at a minimum 4 times a year. I think you should be checking on it quarterly and just see things change when we get stiff, when we get weak, when we get overtrained or undertrained. Our running form can change and we should be checking up on it there. So, that was a tangent. I don't know if I got to the question there.
Kind of timing.
Yeah, timing. The other part of the timing issue is, like, I had a runner come in, had seen 4 or 5 other providers having different injury, but IT band issues. And we were going through, and there's 3 or 4 weeks left in the cross country season. And this is, not preventative, but I'm absolutely changing the running mechanics on that person. And we saw an instant reduction of pain by over 50% with 3 minutes of drills and 2 minutes of gait retraining.
Yeah.
It's huge. And I think if runners are honest with themselves in the middle of the season like this, and we talk about the preventative, most of the time they're going to be having some sort of ache or pain. Yeah. And if you can relate it back to what you're seeing in the running form analysis, then I would address that as well too. Even if it's just how quickly am I going to get them to change their form depends on how much it's impacting their current running ability.
Yes. I work 2 days a week. We have runners come in from the cross country team, and students are leading them through evaluations for 3D run analysis. And then we do strength, mobility, functional movement, and we kind of assess their 2D motion during like step downs and squats and things like that too. And we always do an early subjective, asking them questions. And the questions always ask, hey, have you had any recent running injuries? And they always say no. And most of the students either aren't like intense runners or haven't worked with runners before. And so I check in with them after, hey, what'd you learn about them? Yeah, everything's good. There's no pain, and we're going to keep going with the evaluation. Then I go, okay, great. I'm just going to come chat with them for a minute. And then I'm like, oh, have you had any niggles in the last week? Like anything bugging you? And they're like, oh yeah, my hamstring and my foot and my knee and like all of these things are hurting. But runners just take that as normal, right? Like, oh, I have these things that hurt. And so the reality, like you're saying, is if things are hurting, now's the time to maybe modify something to decrease some of those symptoms.
Right. It doesn't have to, like, don't wait for it to be an injury that they need to stop running for.
Yes.
You made a really good point that pain is an acceptable part of the sport for most people.
Yes. Right.
And it doesn't have to be.
Doesn't have to be.
Like, we can address that. Like, running doesn't have to hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good. The other thing that I was thinking about as you're talking about this, because I think from your end of the spectrum on we should retrain everybody, I kind of sit a little bit more in the middle. And I think part of my hesitancy is the implications of gait related changes. So if you like change gait, that's going to shift load places. And if you don't know what those changes are, you can just cause new problems. That's one potential downfall. And so in my mind, it's, man, if you're all on your own and you go try to change your gait, you could be setting yourself up for something worse. Or even if you're seeing a PT, but they don't know running gait mechanics, they could also screw you up too. Like just things that in some worlds would be a good thing, whether that's cadence increase or whatever it is. Like they seem like a good idea, but they could cause problems. So I get a little more yellow lighty with it, like less ready to go change everybody's. But maybe that's when I expand it to like everyone else's scope of practice versus like my own decision making, I think, if that makes sense. And then the other thing I say to students a lot when we're in the running clinic is you're going to observe a lot of things, but it doesn't, I say this, I'm like, but it doesn't matter unless it does. Like if somebody's got a bunion deformity or somebody has kind of a pronated foot posture with no arch, or they have a really high arch, don't automatically assume that needs to be addressed unless it matters. So I have that like lens too, where it's like, oh, maybe you see some collapsing, but does that matter for them in this scenario? You know, if they,
Yeah.
I think of like, this is anecdote, but I look at like Connor Mantz run, and the dude's
Who
running with his
just
knees
set
like touching each other, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And just set the American record today for the marathon. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
Crushed it.
then there's
Yeah.
these guys like this that it's like, does it matter that he maybe has femoral anteversion and then also maybe has like high Q angle
Right.
and all these things? What's your thoughts on some of this?
I agree. And I love this conversation too here because it's like, yes, in my practice, I'm going to change everyone, but
Yeah.
I also have a holistic view of them. Before I get
Right.
anybody on the treadmill, I know what their range of motion is, their strength is, I know what their training history is, I know how they sleep, I know how, like, there are so many other things to address too. And we do need to have the foundations of health in place before we start focusing on sports and performance and biomechanics and some of those things too.
Yeah.
Like, listen, I could do gait retraining with everyone, but if they're sleeping 4 hours a night, it's like, it's not going to help.
Right.
So we do need to look at kind of a periodized approach to that as well here of like, hey, at the bottom of the pyramid is health. You know, then we're going to focus on basic range of motion and mobility and strength. And then we can start to get movement patterns involved and do some of those other things too. I guess I'm just strong on it because I think it's something that people don't look at. And you are right that there is oftentimes unintended consequences of changing people's gait. And, you know, you and I both have the advantage of seeing those objectively with 3D, where when we change somebody's gait, we can be like, oh, well, when we did this, this changed. So just think about leaning a little forward when you do that too, and that should address that. So doing this on your own is hard. And I'll go back to the point, like, we need those running pros that are really able to teach us how to run appropriately. That is a really important part of that. But if you're just making small minor changes and listening to it and adapting them gradually, where I had literally a Olympic medalist come in to me and I was changing the gait and I had him on a run walk program. This is a person that is the fastest in the world at their sport. And I said, you're going to run for 2 minutes and walk for a minute. And he looked at me and I was like, trust me, it's going to work. And and it worked. So you have to take it. There's so much to running form. And I don't know. I go back and forth between letting people know, like, it's actually really complex, but it's also really simple too. Like, find something, get to the root cause, and like, it doesn't have to take a whole lot of effort. You just need to make sure you're doing the right thing.
Yeah, that's great. Super fun. I think that being able to actually address running form, despite my more moderate stance, is a huge boon to people, particularly when you have them starting to make those changes and preparing all of the other holistic parts. And we preach that here at Doctors of Running, that like sleep, nutrition, hydration, stress levels, baseline stuff, like every other thing is like the cherry on top in some ways. There's other more foundational things, but you got to have that as a foundation. And otherwise these other little fun things like Normatec boots or whatever aren't going to make the meaningful change. They're not going to make up for 6 hours lost of sleep. So you gotta get the foundation down.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move to another question. We spent a lot of time. I don't know how we got to where we got, but that was fun. Oh no, I have to bring up one more thing. It's funny. I had a colleague who is actually a physics professor, not at all in the physical therapy realm, but he's a runner. And he sent me this article that was published in BJSM, so the British Journal of Sports Medicine. And it was a study of over 5,200 people. And it was for runners. And they were evaluating, I think it was Garmin data or some kind of data source to look at, like, you were talking about training errors as being one, and this 10% rule that's out there. What they did with this one is they found, again, I have to look further into this study, but they basically found that it's not only total workload changes over time, but it's kind of your longest effort and how quickly you change that longest effort. The
Ten
findings of the
percent in the
study,
last
yeah,
month.
they
Yeah.
basically found that not 10% a week, but if you increase that longest run by more than 10%, that increased this cohort's injury risk as compared to a more gradual return. Do you mind spending just a few minutes on your perspective on like how to manage training load in a smart way?
Yeah, I think it really is important, and it's something that if we really had a great understanding, whoever can figure this out is going to be a billionaire
Totally.
because it is very multifactorial. So, to
Yeah.
give a little color background to the audience here, we're talking about the stress that your body goes under, and there's different ways to talk about that. There are
Mm-hmm.
internal stressors and there are external stressors. And we look a lot at the external stressors and we say, oh, what's my volume? How far did I run? How intense did I run? Looking at some of those things, but it's harder to quantify some of the internal things. Not everyone has access to the technology, or there's even like more intricate cellular level things that are going on while we're working out. That's kind of hard to look at some of those things. So if you could quantify stress, you would really be able to see a lot of like, that's what really training load comes down to. Is like, how much stress did I put my body under? And did I give myself enough time to recover before my next session? That's really, in a nutshell, is what we're looking for is, did I hit, there's a super compensation law, right? Where if you do an exercise, your fitness goes down a little bit, then it actually goes back up. And if you time your next workout perfectly, you go to the peak where you went above your baseline, and now you're taking a stepwise progression where your fitness gets better, better, better. However, my stance on this is actually fairly simple and has a decent amount of evidence to support this. I know there's a little bit of conflicting recent studies that have come out, but one of the best predictors of how hard a workout was is your brain and your perception of it there.
Yeah.
The rate of perceived effort on a 1 to 10 scale is really good at taking into account, hey, I ate Chinese food for dinner last night
Yeah.
and stayed up late to watch the Auburn football game. It's a true story. So I didn't feel great today here. So
Dang, they
that's
didn't pull it
gonna.
out either.
I know. That was a rough first half.
Oh.
Yes, but it was. I knew that going into my run,
Yeah.
and I was able to say, "Hey, this run was a little harder today than it would have normally been." So I think first of all, we should quantify it, and I think people should be good self-assessors of how hard something really is. Then that's the first step. The second step is looking at that over a long enough period of time to understand how you are truly adapted to the exercise that you want to do.
Yeah.
And what the Garmin study was saying, I think is relevant, where if you are increasing your longest run by more than 10% compared to what you've done in the last month, that could put you at risk of injury. I
Yeah.
think that study, I I wonder, I didn't see in the methodology, or I didn't understand it. Maybe if I read it, but how were they defining injury, or how were people reporting it? I'm like a little concerned about the
Yeah.
quality of that.
Totally. Yep. Which is a sticky thing, and I don't know it well enough to answer that either, but that's a sticky topic as well, defining it and
Yeah,
then tracking it.
yeah. And tracking it, like with 5,000 participants, how good were they at actually telling you when they got injured? But one of the things that I use frequently with my athletes is acute to chronic workload ratios, where you look at your average training load for the last 4 weeks. So you look at your weekly training load for the last 4 weeks, and then you compare it to the last 7 days and see if there's spikes. And
Yeah.
you're able to climb up. And that has really been very beneficial, where I don't think it's, again, something that is a cancellation. Like, I hit 136%. I need to not run today. I think it's more of a pay attention, listen to your
Yep.
body a little bit more,
Yep.
focus on recovery a little bit more, do a little extra here, get a little extra sleep. It's not necessary to say you shouldn't run or back off that training program. it's just a warning sign that you're a little susceptible to injury.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. That's great. All right. Because we're at the Doctors Running podcast, we have to at least have one shoe related question here. I think that the
Yes.
people would go crazy if we didn't. I'm kidding. But I think this is actually a really interesting topic. And that's one of the most common questions is a combination of did my shoes cause this? And will better shoes fix this? What's your perspective on the interaction of footwear in this condition?
So I think that is a great question. And honestly, we went long on the prevention, but shoes and that is something that I think could be part of that prevention. I think in the terms of making sure that you're tracking how many miles you're putting on your shoes and understanding what your limit is. It's different. It's based on your body. It's based on your running form. I might get 400 miles in a pair of shoes, and Nathan, you might get 500 in the same pair of shoes based off just differences in our body. But no one track that. I think that's something easy to do and can really help out. That's actually something personally, I know when my shoes are wearing out, I get just like I'll have my left shin lights up just a little bit, and I'm like, oh, how many miles do I have? Oh, yeah, I'm around 500. Time to switch them out. So that is an important part. Now, the better shoes is a good question too. And a lot of people tend to go for maximalist type shoes when they start to get this. And it actually is counter beneficial for this particular injury. Because what they found is that maximalist shoes, so those shoes that have a high stack height and a lot of cushion, people tend to spend more time in that pronation or eversion, which is going to load some of these tissues up. So people feel great when they initially put these shoes on, but over the period of a run and over the period of 4 to 6 weeks after they get the shoes, it can actually load them up more and cause more issues with this. So you have to be careful with going with this feels great when I put it on. What's it doing to your running form? How could that be contributing?
I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions about medial tibial stress syndrome and shoes is that a more cushioned, highly stacked shoe is going to be better. And I think it stems from a one lane thought of how shin splints comes about. And you mentioned this earlier that there was a thought that the only reason was because impact. And so, okay, if it's all from impact, I'll get a more cushioned shoe that would compress and get rid of some of that impact and help my shin. When in reality, it's not just impact, it's the tugging of those muscles. And as you just mentioned, those really compliant shoes for someone who is a collapser is putting you into that more, and pronation's not bad. We would agree on that. But moving into a pronated position and hanging out there for a long time is a lot of pull from that muscle on the bone. And so you're getting, and I think that's the missed part for a lot of people, I think for a legitimate reason, because it just makes sense that it comes from impact. But I think that's the biggest misconception is that a softer, higher stack shoe is going to be the best option for me because I have shin splints. And it's more complicated than that. As you said, it can perpetuate some of the things that add stress to the bone.
You're absolutely right. It's counterintuitive for most people to think, I don't want to get this big cushy shoe when I'm having pain in my shin. They're like, no, I want the cushiest, like, give me the biggest shoe that you got. But that's absolutely not always the best thing for it. And you had a good point with that too. Sometimes if you're already a collapser, that's going to magnify it here. There are some people that might be able to wear those types of shoes if they have good form and technique, and they're not having some of that. Like that might not be an issue for it there. But it is something that you want to contribute to say, hey, what is the shoe selection doing? And could it be contributing to it there? So, I think that's important.
Yeah.
And Maxima shoes too, because I found Maxima shoes will also, or not Maxima, sorry, the super shoes, the carbon fiber plate. They're going to put you in a little bit more. Now, the only other thing, the counterbalance of that is that it sometimes reduces the demand on the plantar flexors. So it's not there's a little bit of trade off, and it might depend on the
Yep.
individual if they're having like if they have calf weakness, and that's why you think that it's contributing to some of this, but their form is pretty good. Like a super shoe might not be bad for them. I wouldn't necessarily tell somebody to go run all their miles in those to try
Right.
to prevent it, but
Right.
I might say it's not going to hurt you more because it actually might take a little stress off of your calf muscles because it's going to reduce the stress on that.
Yeah, I think you've hit it on the head with just kind of the matching a shoe to the specific presentation, how one shoe might we say shoes are tools all the time. And so
Yes.
how does a rocker work to your advantage right now? How does it work against you right now? How does stack work in your favor? How does lower stack work in your favor? And it can be a mixture of things.
Oh yeah.
And I think you hit it right on the head. As
Now we
we
did mention one thing.
go ahead.
Sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
one
This is
last thing
great.
with this orthotics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This we didn't talk about that, and we're talking about shoes, but I tend to shy away from orthotics in most situations.
Yeah.
However, short-term orthotic use can be really beneficial for people with shin splints.
Yeah.
And the key to that phrase is short term. This is not, I did mention it during the preventative part
Yeah.
because I don't want people wearing orthotics to prevent shin splints. You
Yeah.
should strengthen your calf, strengthen your hips, do those types of things in the preventative side. But in the presence of shin splints, that person that you were saying, oh, I'm a couple weeks out from my race, that might be somebody that you could use an over the counter orthotic just to offload some of that tissue and give it a chance to heal.
Right.
I typically tape my patients first. If the tape helps, then I'll put them in an orthotic. But it can be a really useful tool to
Yeah.
stimulate healing.
That's perfect. Those treatment trials are amazing. And
Yes,
for when you say orthotics, are you just saying kind of something over the counter that
right.
replicated it? You're not doing these custom orthotic things. It's
I
much
don't.
quicker than that
No.
because it's short term. Get something that just
Yes.
changes their symptoms.
Right. The foot is
Totally.
so intricate. Like, I know that there's people that will disagree with me on this, and there's a lot of orthotic based people out there, but like, I think the foot is very, very sophisticated. And for us to try to replicate some of that sophistication and get, like, you're teaching musculoskeletal courses right now, right?
Yep.
Do you remember
Yep.
learning about all the different, like, planes of motion? I mean, I remember
Yes.
Irene teaching me this of like
Yes.
all the different planes of motion of all this. And to say that I can just like put a little piece of plastic on the inside of your heel to try to replicate this and that I've got that angle exactly right. I don't
Not
know
quite.
about that. Like, maybe I'm just not good enough. Maybe there's people that can. I'm not good enough, but I think a tape trial and a 30, $40 on a over the counter insert is
Oh,
going to do the job because you're only going to use it for 2 to 3 weeks. And then I'm going to
yep.
transition you out.
Yep. Perfect. So before we wrap things up, is there anything else that you want to share either about shin splints and medial tibial stress syndrome or kind of about what's going on with Run DNA?
Yeah, I appreciate that we had a lot of talk about running form here.
Yeah.
That is always great to hear. I think that's why this is a fun injury to talk about because that is
Yeah.
something that's near and dear to us at Run DNA. We do have some exciting things coming up with this to try to help runners a bit more here and try and get to the runner audience as well. You can always go to rundna.com and find one of our providers, like one of these running pros that we talked about.
Yeah.
We list the people that have taken our courses that have our 3D equipment. Go find those. We're having a little contest coming up, or not a contest, more like a giveaway,
Yeah.
where we're giving away some things. Just really wanting to give back to the running community and learn more about runners and what they're looking for. And there might be a little Easter egg in that giveaway here if you are curious about what your running form looks like. So
Cool.
if you're hearing this between October 20th and November 20th of 2025, you might want to check out the Run DNA Instagram for a chance to win some prizes, and there might be something, a little bonus in there that you can check out too.
Well, Doug, thank you for taking the time. We always record on Sunday nights. Thank you for taking this time to meet with us, chat about this condition, share your knowledge and wisdom with us all. We really appreciate it.